What a smart rapper. Today we're going to talk about what do you need to know in order to mix your own songs. Like, what are the basics? And I'm actually going to bring you into Pro Tools and show you the basics of all of the plugins. And just so you know, you don't have to have Pro Tools. The plugins will work for other softwares too, but I want you to have the basic understanding of the small things you need to know in order to get a decent mix from a track. I know that this may be a bit advanced for a lot of you because I remember I read the book How to Record at Home for Dummies, and I read that book like 5 times, and in the parts where it talked about compressors and EQ, I was completely dumbfounded. I did not understand what the things meant, and then later when I learned what they meant, I was like, oh, that's what the book was talking about. So like, there are barriers and layers to learning, but if you want to learn how to mix your own stuff and get a decent mix, I believe that you're gonna learn a lot from this video. So we're gonna talk about that today on smartrapper.com. I'm Rob Level, and you're gonna get smarter right after the intro. Okay, so the chances are, and this is kind of the same reason that I learned and taught myself to mix initially, was you're probably at a point where you don't want to have to rely on someone else to do the stuff for you, right? Because you probably don't have anybody, or you don't have the money to pay somebody else to do it. So you're like, man, I gotta do this myself. And that's how a lot of things will turn out for you. And as being an artist, because you're gonna have to wear a lot of hats, you're gonna have to learn a lot of jobs in order to excel. I know this is scary and you're probably thinking, oh man, there's gonna be so much to learn and stuff like that, but here's the thing is, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm a perfectionist, right? So I understand where you're coming from if you're like that, but it doesn't have to be perfect. You're probably at a stage in your career where you just need to know enough about mixing to be able to release a song that sounds decent, because even putting a little bit more effort into learning how to mix a song is gonna make you light years better than the guy who just sounds like complete garbage on a song. You can have a crappy microphone and still get a great mix, by the way, in case you didn't know that. You can, if a good engineer can take a $30 microphone and make it sound like a great mix. Of course, it's better to have better gear, but I'm trying to tell you that that's how powerful a mix is. So if somebody else is just like laying down a track and leveling it and not using any effects or anything like that, or setting it in the mix right, it's just gonna sound like crap. I got some one of those yesterday, day before yesterday, and I was like, you know what I'm saying? So you need to learn the basics. You learn these basics that I'm gonna show you, and you're gonna be good to go, okay? I'm just gonna talk about what the plugins do, and then you need to go inside of the software, lay some vocals down, and just test things and see how they work for yourselves, because that's really how you learn. And you guys have heard me talk about this before, about actually trying things, physically trying them, experiencing them for yourself is how you're gonna learn. Just watching a video is not. You need to try things, apply them, and see how it goes. So I'm gonna go into Pro Tools, and then I'm gonna show you guys the plugins and the differences in how they sound, laid on a track, and what the things do, the basics of what they do. It's not really that complicated. Don't be scared. Let's go ahead and get into it. You're about to get smarter. Also, like to point out real quick, I'm not the best engineer in the world. That's not what I wanna be, okay? I only know what I need to know, okay, and that's all that you really need to know till you get to a level where somebody else can mix your stuff for you and you can sit there and help them with it, okay? Also, take into consideration that I mixed a whole bunch of my projects. My first mixtape that blew up, I mixed that 100% myself, okay? So take that into consideration. Let's get into it. I am going to show you the basics of everything, and the basics that that you need to know. This is all you need to know in order to release your own songs, because this is all that I had learned to release my own songs, okay? And then really it's just playing with stuff. So let's just start with stuff like this, right? Now what I'm gonna show you is actually, because it's EQ, okay? And EQ is equalization. It's pretty much how it's the frequency of ranges, right? So these are all the ranges. And all you're doing here is you are able to manipulate where you're boosting your vocal. And here's a great way to look at it. Anything below 500 is bass. The more bass I add, the bassier it gets. And I know this isn't directly plugged in the computer, but let me give you a great example here. Watch this. Watch this now. Let me pull all this down. You won't even be able to hear really any of the vocal because all of the high ends ripped out. It's all bass. All bass. Hear it? It's all bass. Now watch this. Let me reset that real quick. Now let me show you this. So anything below 500 is going to be bass. And as you start moving from around 1,000 to 3,000, it starts getting more into the vocal range. Then from like 3,000 to 5,000 is like pretty much where you see how I boosted it right here, the 3 to 5,000 range. That's because that's where my vocal's sitting. That's where our vocals usually sit at, right? So watch this. It's clean. It'll get cleaner. Watch this. I already had it where I wanted it to fit inside of this mix, though. What you're trying to do is every single instrument and every piece of the beat sits in its own range. So you can say like, you know, like drums sit here, and then certain things sit here, and certain things sit here, and then you want your vocal to sit in the middle. So like there's all these pieces, and it's all molding together. That's what mixing is. You're mixing your vocal into something. And again, I hope I'm explaining this right, but at the same time, I'm not a professional, so I hope this helps a little bit, okay? So that's what EQ is. It's so you can affect the frequency ranges. Okay, now we're going to talk about a compressor really quick. What a compressor is it affects those dynamic ranges, right? And then it compresses them. It takes all of these dynamic ranges and it'll boost the quieter ones. So like if you can't really hear something that's being said in a certain part, like let's say that we're right here, right? Look at this right here, okay? Let's say it's like it's this right here, and you can't really hear that. The higher you turn up your compressor, the higher boosted this will get right here. Okay, this would have gain. You don't see it, but it's affected by it being plugged in. And then it also attenuates, which means it forces to reduce anything on the high end, depending on how you set the peak reduction. So like if it's like really poppy, it's like way too loud, it'll start pushing it down. And that's what compression is. It's like, you know, you compress a car when they crush a car, or you compress a can. It's compressing it, right? So it's boosting the bottom, but it's also crushing the top. But you can also allow for more release on the top by letting the peak reduction be higher. I know that may be a little tough to understand, but compressors are very valuable because if you can't really hear pieces of your vocal, it'll boost it up, right? It's very valuable. All right. Let me give you an example of that. I just want to make sure I didn't mess any of this up. Again, and by the way, this is a song I recorded it and everything in like 2012. It just happens to be one of the sessions that I have where I was like, well, I've used this as an intro. They've heard this song before. It won't be like too much if I show them this. So. Now it sounds way too bassy because I didn't put the compressor back. Because the compressor was already set. See, I boosted it by 10. Let's try to listen to it. Watch if I turn this all the way down, how it sounds in the track. You can't even hear it.
And I'm always expecting to work like I'm on Cardo. It's
too much.
The flow, the raw whoa. And every time we pass cops, I'm so dope. That was a close call.
Right, so it's compressing it. All right, so you need a compressor, and you can see here I got an EQ, I got a compressor, and then I have a limiter. And what a limiter does, it gives it a threshold. Like how high do you want this to go? It's very similar to what the compressor does, but it does it in its own way. All right, so it's like watch this. You're gonna see it. Let me show the levels. So if I pull the threshold down, it'll make it louder.
I never take a day off because it's Aldo. I'm always expecting to work like I'm on Cardo. It's a kid with the flow, the raw whoa.
It's not popping too much. Then there's a ceiling, all right? So you can set the ceiling too. So that setting no ceiling means the vocal's sitting higher in the dynamic range. Now you can already hear this too much.
I'm always expecting to work like I'm on Cardo. It's the kid with the flow, the raw whoa. Every time we pass.
It's not super complicated. So what I like using this because it pulls more from the lower end because it's a threshold. It's like again with the compression, and the threshold is like it's the threshold. It's from the bottom, and then the ceiling is obviously the top. So if you turn down the threshold, it's boosting the lower end. So the compressor itself started doing that, and then you give your vocals a little bit more boost by adding the limiter to it and pulling the threshold down, right? So that's another way to boost the vocals. Now, let me turn off both of these, and you're gonna hear how you won't be able to hear anything. Like that's damn near flat vocals. And then to turn them back on. This is why you need to learn basic mixing stuff, because even just having those two on it makes a massive difference. And then throwing the EQ on it makes it clearer and easier to hear. Okay. And I know I'm not explaining this like a professional, like but this isn't my job. This is what I just know how to do this, right? So on the side. Anyway, now we need to talk about chain real quick. Okay, chain. The chain, there's also actually an order, right? So if I put the order that these are in and the way that they're affected going up, Okay, so anything that I put below this is going to be affected by the limiter, the compressor, and the EQ. If I put this compressor here, the compressor now goes through the limiter, and then goes to the EQ, then goes to the vocal, right? And then if I put the compressor back, the limiter is underneath the compressor. So now the limiter is going through the compressor, and the compressor and the limiter are going through the EQ. It's a chain. Anything underneath it affects everything above it. Okay. So if I were to add anything in here, if I wanted to add any one of these many plugins I have, you know what I'm saying? It now goes through these. And if I were to put this on top, right, or I put these below it, anything underneath it then goes through it. It's anything underneath it. It's affected by what's called a chain. Okay, and this means that when you're mixing, test different things. Say, hey, maybe I'll put this here. Maybe this will sound different. But then everything that above it is affected, right? So if I change the EQ, everything below the EQ is affected by that change that I make. And that's where like real mixing skills come in, because you understand all of those things. That's a little bit more advanced, and I want to go into that right now. But these are the basic things you need to know. And I'm also showing you this older song because it's an older song, and I know a lot more about mixing and like stuff like that now compared to this is where I was at 5 years ago. Okay, like this is 5 years ago mixing. Like this is very basic. Okay, you're probably looking at these like you're like, what the fuck are those, bro? What are these things right here? These are buses, but they're being bussed to that, right? So look at this. So this gets a little bit confusing, but it's very helpful. So right now you're not seeing any reverb or echo on these tracks, but they're in there. Watch.
The flood flow, the raw whoa.
Raw, whoa, raw, whoa. It's echoing out, but you're not seeing the echo actually on the track. Instead of what's happening is it's being sent. So we're using a send. And the send, it comes from a different channel, and you can set a bunch of plugins on it, and then you can send it to numerous channels. So you can say, I like these settings. I'm going to send I want to be able to use these on whatever channels, and then you just bus them. So right, so you see this is bus 1, bus 2, and this is where the reverb's at. So anything that over here has, if I were to go here, right, and I go to the bus, and I go and I find bus 1, bus 2, anything that is on this bus 1, even if it's the reverb or whatever it is, anything that's on this is going to send to that track. And that's what's cool, because you can have the same settings setting to numerous tracks. Like I can just technically do set all those things on there, and it'll affect all my main vocals instead of setting settings on each individual one. I know it's probably a bit confusing. I apologize. But that's very useful. Again, that's advanced. You don't have to know that. You're good with just these. But I like using being able to use the reverb and the echo, because the whole song is pretty much going to have the same reverbs and echoes. I don't need to change those on every piece. That's why you put them on a bus, because they're going to send, and then everything sounds the same. It sounds fluid as far as reverb and echoes go. Now let's talk real quick about reverb and echo. What's the difference between reverb and echo? Reverb is the environment, the sound. Like, yeah, it's like the way that your sound interacts with your sound environment. So when I talk and it's bouncing off the walls, and that sound that it makes from it being a medium-sized room with basic acoustic treatment, that's the reverb. Now an echo is like echo, 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 echo. Never mind. My Amazon Echo. But yeah, so that's how that works. And then that's probably enough information as far as that goes. So let's go back over these real quick. Number one, I also want you guys to consider like leveling things out. You need to make sure when you're recording your vocals that they sit right in the middle. If they are spiky, if they're like if they all are like this, that's not a good thing. They kind of need to be right in the middle like this the whole time, because you can use a compressor and push it up. If it's already too loud, when you use a compressor, it's going to hit the ceiling. Okay, just take that into mind. I showed you guys the EQ. Again, this is the EQ. This is a 6-band EQ. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bands, and that's because you can control each individual band. If you had like a 4-band EQ, it would only have 4 bands. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, which means you can only control certain ranges of it. But you can also change the width and how narrow and wide the range affected is. Compressors, again, it just compresses the vocal, right? And it definitely need a compressor. You definitely need a limiter. Limiter does the same with the threshold and then the peak. Okay, but I recommend using both. Then the chain, which is the chain of events that happen through it. The sends, which are useful, but don't overwhelm yourself with the sends. Just know that they exist and you'll learn them eventually. Reverb being the room, echo being an echo. All right, that's pretty much the basics of mixing. And I'm not a mix engineer. Again, I gotta say that because I don't know if I explained all that right, but I hope that that explained enough to you guys. All right. All right, hit me with a like, hit me with a subscribe, and hit that little bell when you hit the subscribe button because it's going to notify you every time I release a new video so you can become a smarter rapper. I really hope this helped you, and if you have any questions on specific ones, maybe I'll make little videos explaining more in more detail about each individual one. That might even have been a better idea, and then I'll even show examples of it and how it sounds on the track once I get my computer to recognize the computer audio instead of just playing through the speakers. But yeah, that's it, guys. I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video. I'm Rob Level. This is smartrapper.com. Yeah, here's some more videos.
I've been up all day on a paper chase, trying to make my way up. Don't care what they say, it's gonna be okay. It can't bring